The role of the Crusades in shaping European feudalism. Introduction. Feudalism before the Crusades. Feudalism in medieval Europe was a system of mutual obligations between lords, vassals, and serfs. Centered on the ownership and control of land, it defined the social, political, and economic hierarchy of the time. Before the Crusades, feudalism provided stability in a fragmented Europe, with castles, local militias, and knights ensuring protection in exchange for loyalty and service. The Crusades, which began in 1096, disrupted and transformed feudalism in profound ways. By drawing knights, nobles, and peasants away from their traditional roles, the Crusades weakened local ties, encouraged the centralization of power, and introduced new economic dynamics. This essay explores these changes, illustrating how the Crusades contributed to the evolution of European feudalism. Chapter 1. The Feudal Motivation for Crusading. The feudal nature of the call to arms. When Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade, he appealed directly to Europe's feudal hierarchy. Knights and nobles, bound by loyalty to their lords, were encouraged to take up the cross as an extension of their feudal duties. The promise of spiritual rewards, including absolution and eternal salvation, provided a powerful incentive for participation. The Crusades also offered an opportunity for younger sons of noble families, who often had little prospect of inheriting land, to gain wealth and status. Feudal obligations to serve one's lord in times of war found a new outlet in the broader mission of defending Christendom. A fictional perspective. Sir Richard's dilemma. Sir Richard of Normandy, a fictional knight, faced a difficult decision when his lord pledged to join the First Crusade. As Richard's feudal duty required him to accompany his lord, he left his small estate in the hands of his wife and steward. "I do this not only for my lord but for the glory of God," Richard wrote to his wife. "Yet my heart is heavy, for I fear the strain this journey will place upon our lands and people." Richard's departure illustrated the tension between local responsibilities and the broader call to crusade, a challenge faced by many feudal knights. Chapter 2. The Weakening of Feudal Bonds. Absentee lords and shifting loyalties. The absence of many nobles and knights during the Crusades disrupted traditional feudal relationships. Lords who departed for the Holy Land often mortgaged or sold their lands to fund their expeditions, transferring power to wealthy merchants or rival nobles. In their absence, stewards or castellans managed estates, sometimes consolidating power for themselves. For vassals and serfs, the prolonged absence of their lords created uncertainty and, in some cases, opportunities for greater autonomy. As a result, feudal bonds weakened, and local power structures began to shift. A fictional perspective. The steward's ambition. During Sir Richard's absence, his steward, Hugh, took advantage of the situation to expand his influence. Hugh negotiated with neighboring estates, raising taxes and forming alliances that benefited himself as much as his absent lord. "Sir Richard entrusted me with his lands," Hugh declared to the local vassals. "It is my duty to ensure they flourish in his stead." While Hugh's actions preserved the estate, they also altered the balance of power, highlighting the unintended consequences of the Crusades on feudal governance. Chapter 3. The Centralization of Power. The Rise of Monarchies. The Crusades played a significant role in the centralization of power in Europe. As nobles sold or forfeited their lands to finance their journeys, kings and monarchs often acquired these territories, expanding their domains. The growing wealth and authority of monarchs allowed them to assert greater control over their kingdoms, weakening the traditional feudal hierarchy. For example, in France, King Louis VII used the Second Crusade to consolidate his power, while in England, King Richard I, the Lionheart, relied on royal revenues to fund his participation in the Third Crusade, further solidifying the monarchy's role in governance. A fictional perspective. Sir Richard's return. Upon his return from the Holy Land, Sir Richard found that much of his land had been absorbed into the holdings of a neighboring baron, who had allied himself with the crown during Richard's absence. "Our lands are no longer ours," Richard lamented to his wife. "We fought for Christendom, but it is the king's banner that now flies over Normandy." Richard's experience reflected the broader trend of centralization, as individual nobles lost power to stronger, more centralized authorities. Chapter 4. Economic Changes and the Decline of Feudalism. The Rise of a Cash Economy. The Crusades accelerated the transition from a barter-based economy to a cash economy. Lords who needed to finance their expeditions often demanded monetary payments from their vassals instead of traditional services. This shift weakened the feudal system, which was built on the exchange of land and labor. The influx of wealth from trade with the East further transformed European economies. Crusaders returning from the Holy Land brought back luxury goods such as spices, silk, and precious metals, stimulating markets and encouraging the growth of towns and cities. A fictional perspective. A merchant's opportunity. Hugh, Sir Richard's ambitious steward, capitalized on the growing demand for cash. By establishing a trading post on Richard's estate, he attracted merchants and artisans, transforming the once isolated manor into a bustling market town. Gold flows where swords cannot, Hugh observed. The Crusades may take our knights, but they bring us wealth in return. Hugh's actions reflected the economic changes that eroded the feudal order, as commerce and trade created new centers of power outside the traditional manorial system. Chapter 5. The Role of the Military Orders. Knights Templar and Feudal Alternatives. The rise of military orders such as the Knights Templar and Knights Hospitaller introduced new models of land ownership and governance. These orders operated independently of traditional feudal hierarchies, managing vast estates across Europe and the Levant. Their efficient administration and wealth made them powerful players in medieval politics and economics. The Templars, for example, developed banking systems that allowed crusaders to deposit funds in Europe and withdraw them in the Holy Land. This innovation further undermined the feudal system, as knights and nobles increasingly relied on the resources of these orders rather than their own estates. A fictional perspective. Richard's encounter with the Templars. During his time in the Holy Land, Sir Richard sought assistance from the Templars, borrowing funds to equip his men. Impressed by their discipline and wealth, he reflected on the contrast between their system and the feudal structure he had known. The Templars serve no lord but God, Richard wrote in his journal. Perhaps this is the future. A knighthood not bound by land but by faith. Chapter 6. The Cultural Impact on Feudal Ideals. The Evolution of Chivalry. The Crusades influenced the culture of feudal Europe, particularly through the development of chivalry. The knightly code evolved to incorporate religious devotion, emphasizing virtues such as piety, humility, and the protection of the weak. These ideals reshaped the identity of knights, linking their martial skills to the broader mission of defending Christendom. Chapter 7. The Decline of Serfdom and Rise of Free Labor. A Changing Social Order. The Crusades significantly disrupted traditional labor systems. As lords mortgaged or sold their estates to finance their journeys, serfs often found their ties to the land loosened. Some lords offered freedom to serfs in exchange for monetary contributions, allowing them to join the crusade or fund its cause. Others left their estates under the control of stewards, whose management styles varied widely, leading to shifts in the expectations of laborers. The Crusades also spurred the growth of towns and trade, creating new opportunities for serfs to escape the constraints of manorial life. Many sought work in burgeoning urban centers, where guilds and merchant networks offered alternatives to agricultural labor. A fictional perspective. A serf's freedom. Martin, a serf on Sir Richard's estate, found his life transformed by the Crusades. When Richard departed for the Holy Land, Martin's labor obligations were replaced with a small monetary tax, which he paid by selling surplus crops in the local market. Over time, Martin saved enough to purchase his freedom. The Crusades took my lord but gave me liberty, Martin reflected in later years. For the first time, I work not for obligation but for my own family's future. Martin's story illustrates how the Crusades accelerated the decline of serfdom, contributing to a freer, more mobile labor force in Europe. Chapter 8. The Growth of Towns and the Rise of the Bourgeoisie. Urban centers and economic transformation. The Crusades stimulated trade and economic activity, leading to the expansion of towns and the emergence of a wealthy merchant class. Cities like Venice, Genoa, and Bruges grew rapidly, as they became hubs for the exchange of goods, wealth, and ideas. The rise of the bourgeoisie challenged the traditional dominance of the feudal aristocracy, introducing a new dynamic to European society. Merchant wealth often rivaled that of landed lords, allowing towns to negotiate greater autonomy. Charters granted by monarchs or absentee lords empowered urban centers to govern themselves, further eroding the feudal system's influence. A fictional perspective, a merchant's ambition. Hugh, the steward who had managed Sir Richard's estate, used his newfound wealth from trade to establish a market town near the manor. Over the years, the town grew into a thriving center of commerce, attracting artisans, merchants, and even former serfs. The future belongs to those who trade, Hugh declared at a town meeting. The sword may win battles, but gold wins the world. Hugh's transformation from steward to urban leader reflected the growing power of the merchant class and the shift from a feudal to an economic model of wealth and influence. Chapter 9. Long-term political consequences. The strengthening of royal authority. The Crusades helped monarchs consolidate power, as many nobles who joined the campaigns mortgaged or forfeited their lands. Kings used this opportunity to expand their domains, asserting greater control over formerly independent barons. Additionally, the financial demands of the Crusades led to the establishment of taxation systems, giving monarchs a more consistent revenue stream. The centralization of power also led to the emergence of stronger legal and administrative systems, reducing the autonomy of feudal lords and creating the foundations for modern states. A fictional perspective, a king's gain. King Philip of France, a fictionalized composite of historical monarchs, used the Crusades to strengthen his hold on the kingdom. When rebellious barons sold their estates to fund their expeditions, Philip purchased these lands, integrating them into the crown's holdings. The crusade is a gift from heaven, Philip confided to his advisors. While others